You have no idea who I am. Jasmine's calm, measured voice cut through the tension in the air like a knife. The weight of the words hung heavily, and for a brief, split second, the chaos around her seemed to pause, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The moments that led to this stillness had been anything but calm. It had started as an ordinary day. Jasmine Carter, a woman of poise and elegance, strolling through the park with her dog. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the green grass, and the distant hum of city life was a soothing backdrop. Everything felt normal, peaceful, until it wasn't. She had no reason to expect trouble, but when the officers approached her, that would all change. At first, they didn't seem like a threat, just two officers on patrol, stopping for a routine check. But then the tone shifted. The way they looked at her was different, their gazes sharp, assessing. Their words were dismissive at first, almost playful, as if they were used to throwing around their authority without thought. "What's with the dog?" one officer asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Jasmine paused, holding the leash a little tighter, her fingers curling around it as she stayed calm. She could feel the tension building, but she refused to let it show. She simply smiled politely and responded, "He's just a dog. We're just walking." The officer didn't smile back. His eyes narrowed, and a sense of unease began to creep in. "You sure he's not some kind of weapon?" he muttered, the question hanging in the air as if he was looking for an excuse to escalate things. Jasmine's breath caught slightly, but she kept her composure. "He's just a dog," she repeated, her voice steady. The situation was getting uncomfortable, but she had dealt with situations like this before. Unjust, unfair, but never out of her control. She had learned long ago to pick her battles. But what came next wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of something far bigger. The officer's partner, the one who had been standing back, suddenly took a step forward. He reached out, grabbing the leash, pulling it from her hands. Jasmine stepped back instinctively, her heart racing. The first officer followed suit, closing the distance between them. "Hey," she protested, her calm demeanor slipping for the first time. "What are you doing?" The second officer smirked, tugging the leash harder. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart." Jasmine felt a surge of anger, but more than that, she felt the all-too-familiar sting of injustice. Being seen as less than human, less than worthy of respect. She knew this feeling all too well, and just as she was about to respond, something snapped. The officer's words and actions crossed a line. Her body tensed, and something deep inside her shifted. She wasn't just a woman with a dog anymore. She was Jasmine Carter, a highly trained Delta commander with years of experience, and she had been pushed too far. The officers didn't know it yet, but they had just made a monumental mistake. Jasmine's silence was her strength. The quiet resolve in her eyes was her weapon. She wasn't just standing there anymore. She was about to make them realize exactly who they were dealing with. She straightened her posture, her voice coming out cold and calculated. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" The officers paused, exchanging a confused glance. Jasmine's calm demeanor returned, but there was something else behind it now, a quiet fury, a force of nature they couldn't comprehend. "Let me tell you," she continued, her voice unwavering. "I am the deadliest Delta commander you'll ever meet. And this is a mistake you'll never forget." The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating, as Jasmine stood perfectly still, facing the two officers. The park around them remained eerily quiet, the soft rustling of the trees a stark contrast to the storm brewing between the three of them. Her eyes, now colder than ever, locked onto the officer who had taken the leash from her hand. She could feel the heat rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady, each word deliberate. "You will regret this," she said, her tone low but firm. The officer smirked, clearly thinking she was just another woman who could be intimidated, another person they could push around. But Jasmine wasn't that woman. She had never been that woman. Her life had been one of discipline, resilience, and strength, built on the foundations of years of service in the Delta Force. "Take a step back," Jasmine said quietly. The command in her voice made the officer pause for just a moment. But it was enough. Enough for her to take a breath, enough for her to calm the storm that was raging inside her. She wasn't going to lose control. Not yet. The second officer, still clueless about who she was, took another step forward. "I said, take a step back," Jasmine repeated, her gaze unwavering. This time, There was no smirk on his face. He hesitated, just long enough for her to make her move. Without any warning, Jasmine reached into her bag, her fingers brushing against the edge of her phone. She dialed a number, her movements swift and calculated. The officer watched her every move, a mix of confusion and suspicion clouding his eyes. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. Jasmine didn't respond. The sound of her phone ringing was the only answer. The other officer, growing impatient, took another step toward her, but before he could say a word, the phone in her hand connected. "It's time," Jasmine whispered into the phone. The words were a signal that this moment, this confrontation, was about to take a drastic turn. The officer, still staring at her, looked around nervously, unsure of what to do next. And then, like a switch had been flipped, the tone of the situation shifted. Jasmine's calm demeanor never wavered. She was a woman of control, a woman who knew how to handle pressure, and she knew exactly what would happen next. As if on cue, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the park, its engine growling like a predator closing in on its prey. The officers looked up, startled. Jasmine didn't flinch. "You don't know who I am, but you will," she said, her voice sharp and resolute. The SUV came to a stop in front of them, and the door swung open. Out stepped a man, tall and authoritative, his military uniform crisp and immaculate. The officers froze. Jasmine didn't even look at the man as he approached. She knew exactly who he was. He was the one who had been waiting for this moment, the one who had been tracking every move she had made. "Is there a problem here?" the man asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who held unimaginable power. The officers were speechless, their expressions changing from disbelief to fear in a matter of seconds. The man, now standing beside Jasmine, turned to them, his eyes cold and commanding. "This woman," he began, his tone unwavering, "is Jasmine Carter, and you have made a very big mistake." The realization hit them like a punch to the gut. The two officers had no idea who they were dealing with. Jasmine Carter wasn't just any woman in the park. She was the deadliest Delta commander, and now they would learn just how wrong they were to underestimate her. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Jasmine stood there, the picture of calm, as the officers stammered, unsure of how to proceed. But Jasmine wasn't interested in their apologies or their confusion. She had made her point. She had shown them exactly what happens when you mistake her for something she wasn't. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. Her calm demeanor was a mask, hiding the fury inside. She had fought battles in the darkest corners of the world, and now she was fighting for justice in the light of day. She turned away from the officers, nodding to the man who had come to her aid. "Let's go," she said simply. And as they walked away, the two officers stood frozen, their world crumbling around them as they realized they had just crossed the wrong person. The drive from the park to the office was silent, the only sound being the low hum of the engine. Jasmine sat in the back seat, her face calm, but her mind racing. The moment she had been waiting for had arrived, but it wasn't enough just to reveal who she was. She had to make sure it never happened again. The officers who had made the mistake of underestimating her would now face the consequences. But there was a bigger picture at play. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, a simple message, "We're ready." She tapped the screen to acknowledge, then put the phone down. The man beside her, Captain Robert Dawson, didn't say a word either. He knew better than to fill the air with useless chatter. Dawson was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. Jasmine had worked with him for years. He had been there for some of her toughest missions, and he understood the weight of the moment. They were headed straight to the heart of the operation. The agency's headquarters, a building that stood as a symbol of power, control, and the ultimate authority. Jasmine had not only been a soldier for years, but she had also climbed the ranks to the position she held now. It wasn't just her skill in combat that had earned her the title of Delta Commander. It was her ability to see the bigger picture, to fight battles not just on the ground, but in the halls of power, where decisions were made that affected lives. As they pulled up to the building, the enormity of what was about to happen hit her. This wasn't just about a personal vendetta. It was about restoring order, about ensuring that what happened in the park didn't happen again, anywhere, to anyone. The doors opened, and Jasmine stepped out of the car, her shoes clicking against the polished floor as she walked toward the elevator. Dawson followed, his presence a silent reassurance. They didn't need to speak. They both knew what had to be done. Inside the elevator, the tension was palpable. Jasmine stared ahead, her reflection in the mirror on the opposite wall. The woman staring back at her was calm, composed, yet beneath that calm exterior, there was a storm of emotions. Anger, frustration, and a determination that had been forged over years of military service. She had seen the darkest sides of the world, but nothing had prepared her for the feeling of helplessness she had felt earlier. The officers in the park had not just threatened her, they had threatened her sense of justice. They had disrespected her, humiliated her, and for what? Because of the color of her skin? That thought alone made her blood boil. But she knew she couldn't let her emotions drive her actions. She needed to think clearly. She needed to be the commander she was trained to be. The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival. The door slid open, and Jasmine stepped out into the vast, high-tech control room. Agents and analysts worked at their stations, their eyes flicking toward her before quickly looking away, not out of fear, but out of respect. They all knew her reputation. They all knew what she had accomplished. Jasmine walked to the center of the room, where a large screen displayed the details of the operation she was about to initiate. She tapped a few keys on the console, bringing up the files on the two officers. The screen flickered for a moment before the information appeared in front of her. Names, histories, records, everything she needed to know. "Get me everything," she said quietly. Dawson nodded and made the call. Within minutes, every file, every detail about the two officers was on the screen, every questionable action, every misconduct, every report of inappropriate behavior, even the internal complaints that had been buried over the years. Jasmine scanned the files, her eyes narrowing as she read. These weren't just bad cops. They were part of a larger problem, one that reached much further than a single incident in the park. The system had failed. It had failed her, and it had failed countless others who had been victims of discrimination and abuse. Jasmine exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming lightly against the console. This was her moment. She wasn't just going to take down these two officers. She was going to bring the entire system into the light. She wasn't going to let their actions stand, and she wasn't going to let them be swept under the rug. She would expose the truth, and she would make sure that the people in power saw it. She turned to Dawson. "Prepare the press release. We're going public." Dawson's gaze was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Are you sure? This will shake the entire department." Jasmine nodded. "It's time. If we don't do this, nothing will change. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine. The truth has to come out." Dawson didn't argue. He knew she was right. "I'll get it ready." Jasmine turned back to the screen, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the details. She had been through wars, but this, the fight she was about to start, was going to be something else entirely. This wasn't just about bringing two officers to justice. This was about changing the system, about making sure that the color of someone's skin would never be the reason they were treated unfairly again. And as she looked at the files on the screen, Jasmine knew that this was just the beginning. The room was quiet as Jasmine stood in front of the screen, her fingers lightly resting on the console. The files were laid out before her, a web of information connecting the officers to a deeper, more troubling network of corruption. Within the department, the names of other officers appeared on the screen, some familiar, others not, but all linked by a common thread: abuse of power, discrimination, and a complete disregard for justice. Jasmine's mind worked quickly, processing each detail, each connection, and she felt the weight of the task before her. She wasn't just looking for answers. She was hunting for the truth, something that had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and systemic failure for far too long. Dawson returned to the room, his footsteps echoing softly in the stillness. He didn't speak at first, just watched as Jasmine worked, knowing better than to interrupt. He knew this moment had to be on her terms. Jasmine didn't look up, but she could feel his presence. "Everything's in place," he said finally, his voice steady. Jasmine nodded without looking at him. "Prepare the briefing," she said. "The press needs to know what's going on." Dawson hesitated for a moment before responding. "You know how big this is going to be. It'll change everything." Jasmine met his gaze then, her expression unshaken. "It has to. We can't let this go on any longer. It's time to expose everything. No more hiding." Dawson nodded, the weight of the decision settling between them. He understood. This wasn't just about a couple of bad officers anymore. This was about rooting out a deep-seated problem within the system, one that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Jasmine turned back to the screen, her fingers now moving swiftly over the keys. The press release had to be clear, concise, and unflinching. There could be no room for ambiguity. She wasn't going to sugarcoat what had happened, nor was she going to let the department sweep it under the rug. She had seen enough corruption, enough injustice, to last a lifetime. But this was different. This was personal. The officers in the park had pushed her to the edge, but now she was going to turn that anger into something far more powerful: justice. Jasmine's eyes lingered on the screen as she typed the final words of the release. She could already imagine the headlines, the shock that would ripple through the department, and the questions that would follow. For so long, the truth had been hidden, and now it was time for it to come to light. The sound of Dawson's phone vibrating pulled her from her thoughts. He glanced at the screen, then looked up at Jasmine, his face serious. "They're ready. It's time." Jasmine stood, her posture straightening, her mind focused on what needed to be done. This wasn't just about making a statement. This was about changing the entire system, about ensuring that no one else would ever have to face the kind of injustice she had. She had fought for her country, for people she didn't know, and now she was going to fight for those who had been wronged, for those who had been silenced. She turned to Dawson. "Let's make it happen." They walked together through the halls of the building, their steps echoing in the vast, sterile corridors. Jasmine's mind raced, but her exterior remained calm. She had been trained for moments like this, for high-pressure situations where every decision mattered. As they entered the briefing room, the weight of what was about to unfold hit her again. She had never backed down from a fight, but this was bigger than anything she had ever faced. Dawson moved to the front of the room, pulling up the prepared slides on the projector, but Jasmine's gaze was fixed on the door. The reporters, the cameras, the flashing lights, it was all coming. The truth was about to be laid bare, and there would be no turning back. Jasmine's heart beat steady in her chest. She was ready. As the room filled with the hum of anticipation, Jasmine finally spoke, her voice steady and unwavering. "This is the beginning," she said, her words ringing clear and sharp. "We will not allow this corruption to continue. The truth is coming, and nothing will stop it." She stepped forward, ready to take on the battle that was just beginning. The room fell silent, all eyes on her as the truth began to unfold. Jasmine knew that once the press conference started, everything would change. The officers, the department, the entire system, nothing would ever be the same again. And she would make sure of it. The press room was packed, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Cameras flashed, reporters shuffled through their notes, and the murmur of hushed conversations filled the air. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, her posture as poised as ever, but beneath the calm surface, her mind was calculating every move, every word that would come. Next, she had been in high-stakes situations before, but this one was different. This wasn't just about tactical precision or military strategy. This was about bringing the truth to light, about making sure that the people responsible for the corruption within the department would face the consequences. Dawson stood beside her, his usual stoic demeanor matching the gravity of the situation. He had done his part, ensuring that everything was set up for this moment. But now it was time for Jasmine to take charge. She felt the weight of the eyes on her, but she didn't flinch. The world was watching, and she wasn't going to give them anything less than the truth. The room quieted as she stepped forward to the podium. Her eyes swept over the sea of reporters, and for a split second, she allowed herself to take in the moment. This was the turning point. "Thank you for being here today," she began, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the room. "What I have to say will change everything." She paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in. The reporters were silent now, hanging on every syllable. "The actions of 2 officers in this department have brought us to this moment," Jasmine continued, her tone unwavering. "But what I'm about to reveal is far bigger than just those 2 officers." She glanced at the screen behind her, where images of the officers, their records, and their actions were now displayed for everyone to see. The room collectively held its breath as the details of their misconduct were laid bare. "For years, the system has allowed this kind of behavior to go unchecked," Jasmine said, her voice sharp with conviction. "For years, individuals have been mistreated, discriminated against, and silenced. But no more. She stood taller now, the full weight of her words settling into the room. I am Jasmine Carter, Delta Commander in the United States military. I have spent my life fighting for justice, and today, I am here to ensure that justice is served. The reporters stirred, their pens moving quickly as they jotted down every word. The energy in the room shifted from curiosity to full-on focus. Jasmine knew the power of her words, and she knew that once the truth was out there was no going back. The officers involved in this case thought they could intimidate me. She continued, her voice never faltering. They thought that by using their badges, their authority, they could get away with discrimination, harassment, and violence. But they were wrong. She took a moment to let the weight of her words land. Today, we are exposing the cracks in a system that has failed too many. The corruption, the abuse, the injustice, it all ends now. The room was silent, but it wasn't a quiet of disbelief. It was the silence of realization. The kind of silence that comes when something big, something world-changing, is happening right before your eyes. We will not let these actions go unpunished, Jasmine said, her voice rising in intensity. And I will make sure that the truth does not get buried again. The system may have tried to protect them, but now the system will be held accountable. She turned toward the screen again, showing the faces of the officers, their names flashing beneath their pictures. These men are just the beginning, she said, her gaze sharp. We will continue to dig deeper, and we will hold every single person who has perpetuated this cycle of corruption accountable. The reporters were in a frenzy now, asking questions, scribbling notes, trying to process the enormity of what was unfolding. But Jasmine wasn't done. This is not just about 2 officers, she said. This is about every person who has been treated unfairly, who has been harassed or discriminated against by the very people who are supposed to protect them. We are here today because we will no longer stand by and let this continue. Her eyes scanned the room, locking onto each reporter, each person there who would carry her message forward. The truth is out, and it is time for change, she said firmly. No one is above the law, not anymore. She stepped back from the podium, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Dawson was already moving, handling the logistics of the press conference, but Jasmine's mind was already ahead. The battle wasn't over. This was just the first step. There was still work to be done. But today, she had made a stand. Today, the world had seen the truth, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the press conference were a blur of activity. News outlets across the country picked up the story and the ripples of Jasmine's revelations spread quickly, igniting conversations in every corner of the nation. The officers, once confident in their power, were now facing the scrutiny they had long avoided. But for Jasmine, the battle was far from over. The real work had only just begun. As the media frenzy intensified, Jasmine stayed focused on her mission. She knew that exposing the officers was just the first step. The system they operated within was much larger and much more insidious than anyone could have imagined. With Dawson at her side, she dove into the deeper layers of the investigation. The files they had uncovered during the press conference were just the tip of the iceberg. Jasmine's phone buzzed again, pulling her attention away from the stack of documents in front of her. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the message. It was from an anonymous source, someone within the department. The message was short, but the implications were massive. It's bigger than you think. I can give you names. I'll meet you tonight. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She knew the risks of meeting an anonymous informant, but she also knew that without this information, her fight for justice would stall. She stood up, her mind already racing through the possible scenarios. Dawson, I need you to prepare for a late-night operation, she said, her voice steady but urgent. Dawson didn't ask questions. He was used to her directness, her ability to make decisions on the fly. I'll make the arrangements, he said, his expression hardening. Jasmine was no stranger to danger, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. The stakes were higher. The system they were up against wasn't just corrupt, it was entrenched, and getting to the heart of it meant facing the very people she had once fought alongside. Later that night, they met their informant in a dimly lit parking garage, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead providing the only sound. Jasmine's instincts were on high alert as she scanned the area, her eyes sharp. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The informant was a man in his 40s, dressed in a nondescript jacket, his hands trembling slightly as he approached. "You're Jasmine Carter, right?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. Jasmine nodded, her gaze never leaving his. "What do you have for me?" The man looked around, nervously before handing her a manila folder. "These are the names of people higher up in the department," he said. "People who have been covering up the actions of officers like the ones you exposed. If you go public with this, it won't just be those 2 officers you'll be taking down. You'll be shaking the foundation of the entire department." Jasmine's heart raced as she opened the folder, scanning the list of names. They were familiar, some of them people she had once trusted, others she had heard whispered about in the shadows. She could feel the weight of each name, each connection to the corruption that had been allowed to fester unchecked. "Why are you doing this?" Jasmine asked, her voice cold. The informant hesitated for a moment before responding. "Because I can't live with myself anymore. I've been complicit in this system for too long, and I know what it's cost. I just want to make things right." Jasmine closed the folder, her mind already processing the information. "Thank you," she said simply. The man nodded, and without another word, he disappeared into the night, leaving Jasmine standing there, her thoughts heavy. Dawson pulled up in the car, the engine idling as Jasmine climbed in. She didn't speak at first, her mind racing as she looked over the names in the folder again. "We've got work to do," she said finally, her voice determined. Dawson looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What now?" he asked. Jasmine turned to face him, her eyes steely. "We go after them all," she said, her voice firm. "We expose every last one of them. No one is safe." The car drove off into the night, the wheels of justice now in motion. Jasmine knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready. She had spent her life fighting for what was right, and this was the fight that would define her legacy. The system had failed too many, but she wasn't going to let it fail anyone else. Not now, not ever. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparation and strategy. Jasmine and Dawson had become a well-oiled machine, moving with a purpose that was both deliberate and unstoppable. They had gathered the evidence, and now it was time to make their next move. They were getting closer to the heart of the corruption, but the deeper they went, the more dangerous the situation became. Jasmine sat in her office, surrounded by the files they had collected over the last few days. The list of names from the informant had led them to a network of officers, administrators, and politicians, all complicit in a system of corruption that stretched back years. Some of the names were expected, familiar faces in positions of power, but others were a surprise. People she had worked alongside, trusted in the past. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Jasmine was no stranger to betrayal. She had learned long ago that in this line of work, loyalty was often a fragile thing. Dawson walked into the office, a cup of coffee in hand. He placed it on the desk in front of her before sitting down across from her. "We're ready," he said, his tone calm but laced with urgency. Jasmine nodded, her eyes focused on the files before her. "I've been going through the information again. We can't afford any mistakes now." Dawson sat back in his chair, his expression hardening. "I know. This isn't just about taking down a few bad officers anymore. We're about to bring the whole system down. We've got to make sure we have every piece of evidence in place." Jasmine's mind was already running through the next steps. They had enough to go public, but she knew that once the information was released, there would be no turning back. The people they were about to expose had powerful connections, and they wouldn't go down quietly. She needed to be strategic. "We need to make sure the media is ready," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "They're going to come after us, after all of this. We need to control the narrative." Dawson gave her a knowing look. "I've already made arrangements. The major outlets are on standby. We'll release the information in waves. The first wave will drop the names and the connections. The second wave will show the evidence. And the third will be the fallout." Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing with focus. "Good. And what about the higher-ups? The ones who thought they were untouchable?" Dawson paused for a moment before speaking. "We've got a plan for them. We're going to go after them hard. No more hiding in the shadows." Jasmine's gaze softened, but there was no trace of doubt in her expression. "They won't see us coming." Dawson stood up, his eyes lingering on her for a moment. "You've been at the center of every operation, but this is different. You're not just fighting for the truth anymore. You're fighting for something bigger." Jasmine didn't respond right away. Instead, She stood up, walking over to the window. She stared out at the city skyline, the weight of the task before her settling in. This wasn't just about justice. It was about righting a system that had been broken for far too long. It was about taking the power back from those who abused it and giving it back to the people. I've spent my entire life serving this country, Jasmine said quietly. But this is my fight. And I'm not backing down. Dawson nodded and turned to leave, but before he did, he paused at the door. You've got this, Jasmine. I know you do. He stepped out, leaving Jasmine alone with her thoughts. She knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but she was prepared. She had always been prepared. As she turned back to the desk, she picked up the folder containing the final piece of evidence they needed. It was time to end this, to tear down the system that had allowed corruption to thrive unchecked. And she was going to make sure that no one, not even the most powerful, could escape justice. The next few days would be crucial. Jasmine had set the wheels in motion, and there was no stopping them now. The truth would come to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few hours were a blur of strategy, action, and calculated risks. Jasmine and Dawson worked seamlessly together, making final preparations for the upcoming press release. The world would soon know the extent of the corruption within the system, and there was no going back now. The evidence was indisputable, the names were lined up, and the time had come to expose the truth. Jasmine stood in front of the large screen, her eyes scanning the information one last time. The weight of what was about to happen settled on her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. This was what she had fought for. This was her moment. The phone buzzed on her desk, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, her eyes narrowing as she saw the message. They're making their move. It's happening sooner than we thought. Jasmine's stomach tightened. She knew that the people she was about to expose wouldn't just roll over. They had power, connections, and resources at their disposal. But Jasmine had something they didn't. A fierce determination to right the wrongs that had been allowed to persist for far too long. She quickly dialed Dawson. They're moving faster than we thought, she said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. We need to act now. Get the media teams in place. It's time to release everything. Dawson's response was immediate, his voice steady as always. Already on it. We're ready. Jasmine hung up and stood for a moment, taking a deep breath. She had been in high-pressure situations before, but this was different. She was fighting for something more than just justice for herself. She was fighting for every person who had been wronged, for every person who had been silenced, for every voice that had been drowned out by the very system that was supposed to protect them. The press room was already buzzing with anticipation as the journalists gathered. Cameras were set up, and reporters were adjusting their microphones, ready to capture every word. Jasmine and Dawson entered the room, the sound of their footsteps steady and purposeful. The moment they walked in, the room fell silent. All eyes turned toward them. Jasmine stood at the podium, her posture straight, her expression calm but unwavering. She could feel the eyes of the world on her, but she didn't let it shake her. This was her moment. Thank you for being here, Jasmine began, her voice carrying across the room. Today, we are here to expose the truth. The truth that has been buried for too long. The truth that will change the way we look at this system. She paused, letting the words sink in. The reporters were on edge, their pens ready. The officers responsible for this corruption thought they could get away with their actions. Jasmine continued, her gaze never wavering. They thought their badges would protect them. But today, we're going to show that no one is above the law. Not anymore. She turned to the screen behind her, and the names of the officers and officials involved flashed across the screen. The room gasped as the list grew longer, revealing the connections and the depth of the corruption that had been allowed to fester. These are the people who have been abusing their power, Jasmine said, her voice steady and firm. These are the people who have been responsible for turning a blind eye to the pain and suffering of others. She turned back to face the room, her eyes locking with those of the reporters. Today, we are not just exposing the truth. We are making sure that the truth will no longer be ignored. We will not let this continue. The room was electric with energy now, reporters scribbling furiously as the details were revealed. The tension was palpable, but Jasmine remained calm. This was the moment she had been working for, the moment when everything would change. The system may have tried to hide this, but we won't let them. We won't be silenced. We will fight for justice, and we will make sure that the people who have been wronged finally get the justice they deserve. Jasmine paused for a moment, letting her words hang in the air. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We will continue to expose the corruption, and we will continue to fight for what is right. No one is above the law, and today, we're making sure of that." She stepped back from the podium, her heart racing but her mind clear. This was only the beginning, but Jasmine knew one thing for certain. She was ready for whatever came next. She had taken the first step in changing the system, and nothing, no one, would stop her now. The next few days were filled with intense focus and mounting pressure. The press release had done its job. The public was in an uproar, and the media continued to cover the story, amplifying the names of those involved. Jasmine had anticipated the firestorm, but the reality of it was overwhelming. She had expected resistance, but what came next was something even she hadn't fully prepared for. Phone calls, messages, and threats flooded in from all directions. The higher-ups in the department were scrambling, doing everything they could to bury the story, to discredit her, but Jasmine remained steadfast. She had known this day would come, but what struck her the most was the overwhelming sense of urgency. It wasn't just the system she was fighting against. Now, it was the people within it, desperate to hold on to the power they had abused for so long. As she sat in her office, reviewing the next steps with Dawson, the atmosphere was tense. She could feel the weight of every decision. "They won't stop," Dawson said, his voice steady. "They'll try everything to discredit you, but we can't back down now." Jasmine looked at him, her eyes hard but calm. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, her voice firm. "We've come too far." The evidence they had collected was undeniable, but Jasmine knew that to fully dismantle the system, they would have to push even harder. The first wave of exposure had shaken the department, but now it was time to bring the fight to the ones who had orchestrated it all. "We need to move quickly," Jasmine said, her gaze fixed on the screen. "I've spoken with the team. The next steps are already in motion." Dawson nodded. "We'll get the public on our side. The truth is out there now, and it's not going away." Jasmine leaned back in her chair, taking a deep breath. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain: she was not backing down. The foundation of the entire department was shaking, and Jasmine knew that the only way forward was to continue exposing the lies, one piece at a time. Later that evening, Jasmine and Dawson sat down with the legal team. They needed to ensure that their next move was airtight. They had gathered enough evidence, but now they needed the legal backing to make sure the case couldn't be dismissed. "We've got to make this stick," Dawson said, his voice low. "They'll try to find any loophole they can." Jasmine nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. "We'll shut down every avenue. There's no escape for them now." As they went over the final details, Jasmine couldn't help but think back to the moment when everything had changed, the moment she had walked into that press conference and taken a stand. That was the moment the world had seen who she really was. And it was the moment when everything she had worked for in her life had finally come together. But she knew the real fight was just beginning. They were on the verge of something bigger now, something that would change the entire system. "It's time," Jasmine said finally, standing up from the table. The room went quiet as everyone turned their attention to her. She was ready. "We go to the press tomorrow. It's time to end this." Dawson gave her a nod, his eyes reflecting the seriousness of the moment. They had no idea what would happen next, but Jasmine was ready to face whatever came her way. This fight wasn't just about exposing the corruption. It was about ensuring that no one, ever again, would be able to hide behind the badge. The door to the department's dark secrets had been opened, and there was no closing it now. Jasmine turned, her eyes focused on the future. The fight for justice was just beginning, and she wasn't about to lose. Not now. Not ever.